When Joe Biden left Atlanta, Georgia on June 27th, after an underwhelming debate performance, it felt like the wind had been sucked out of the Democrats' sails, not just in Georgia, but nationwide. Fast forward to this past Tuesday, and we witnessed a seismic shift in the energy in the Democratic camp. Kamala Harris, the current vice president of the United States, stormed into the Georgia State Convocation Center with a rally that could be described as nothing short of electrifying. The energy seemed to match that of an Obama campaign rally in the last stretch of the 2008 campaign. Picture this: a boisterous crowd, line dancing, a massive Hotties for Harris banner, and a show stopping performance by Meg the Stallion. Harris's rally wasn't just an event, it was a statement. She's targeting voters of color, younger voters, and even making a play for suburbanites. When Georgia now in with Georgia now in play, thanks to Harris's fresh appeal, it's a game changer for the Democratic Party's chances this November. Vice President Harris made it clear the path to the White House runs straight through the state of Georgia. And, and with policy priorities on immigration, voting rights, and gun control, she's painting a roadmap that Atlanteans are eager to follow. Trump, never one to shy away from a fight, challenged her intellect, but Harris fired back, challenging him yet again to debate her anytime, anywhere. This battle isn't just for Georgia, it's for the soul of the nation. Now, as we turn to the Peach State's political landscape, we have a fascinating guest with us today, running for the U.S. House of Representatives for Georgia's 10th Congressional District. Democratic congressional candidate Lexy Doherty joins us today. Ms. Doherty, thank you for being a part of the Political Mic today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat politics. It's been, like you said, an interesting few weeks in Georgia, to say the least.
So, Ms. Doherty, let's dive into the seismic shift that we've seen in Georgia politics recently. Kamala Harris's rally was nothing short of electrifying, as described before, but the excitement doesn't always translate to votes. We've seen this in past elections. How do you plan to harness this newfound energy to engage both new and skeptical voters in Georgia's 10th district?
I will say one thing that makes it a lot easier to harness is that there's been a lot of organic energy to get it started. So, like you said, that rally in Atlanta was just incredible. And normally I feel like I'm the one bringing up politics to friends and people that I meet. But it seems like almost everyone I talk to these days, even my friends that normally kind of just show up to vote and don't really get engaged other than that, they're the ones coming to me to ask, like, oh my God, like, how's it going? Isn't this crazy? Aren't you excited? So, I'm really trying to make sure that once they've opened the door, that we give them the information they need to make sure that they're registered, that they have a vote plan. So it's both just harnessing that energy that's already there, and then also asking them, what else do you want to do? Do you want to get involved? Make sure you're talking to your friends about how to get registered and how to turn out. So it's mostly just accepting the enthusiasm that people are bringing, and then asking them to use their voices to keep carrying it forward.
Vice President Harris challenged Trump to a debate that was scheduled to happen on ABC on I believe the 10th of September or the 12th. This is a bold stand, of course. How does her assertiveness and policy roadmap on immigration, voting rights, and gun control resonate with the voters that you're meeting on the campaign trail? And what key issues are driving your campaign personally?
So I would say the issues she's talking about are exactly what people bring up to me. If some of your listeners might not know, but last year we had a lawsuit to redistrict the congressional seats and our House and Senate seats because we were so gerrymandered, and a federal court basically ruled that it was racially gerrymandered intentionally to break up the Black vote. So when I talk to people in the district, voting rights is something that comes up a lot because it feels so real to people still. I mean, we can, like I said, point to just last December was when this lawsuit came down. And so that's always at the forefront in the South. And like you said, immigration comes up organically a lot. There's a lot of people that are very concerned about the border and the crisis going on there. And I'm sure you've heard this too. I'm from Athens. I live in Athens. So the murder of Laken Riley comes up a lot. That's something that people are still very sensitive to. And it just really brings immigration home to Georgia and especially Athens, even though, of course, we're not exactly a border state. And um, you mentioned gun rights as well, or um, gun control. So that's also something that while it's like touchy in Georgia and especially kind of the rural South where I am. It's still something that I find that even a lot of more conservative kind of gun rights folks understand this is a huge issue. And, I come from a family of gun owners, right? When we have family events, sometimes we go to the shooting range, like that's the kind of culture that I'm from. And even, people in my family that have always been gun owners are looking around saying like, okay, something's obviously got to change. From my perspective, the only wrong answer on guns is to not do anything. When, gun deaths are the leading cause of deaths for children now, to me, that's just absolutely unacceptable. So, um, a lot of things that Kamala is hitting on are things that are coming up with people in my district when I'm out talking to people. And I also think she's done a really great job of hitting on issues that really matter to working families. I think you kind of touched on those big national issues, but I also hear a lot from people about just like their bottom lines. A lot of people, especially my district, is kind of pretty moderate income. In Athens, Clarke County, like 40% of the students in our public schools live in poverty. So I have a lot of families that are, really relying on school lunches, really relying on things like expanding the child tax credit again. And I'm really excited to hear the Kamala team speaking about those things as well. So she's really hitting on a lot of things that are super important to people in my community.
So, former President Trump has constantly repeated that he has been the best president for African Americans since Abraham Lincoln. And he came with that same line to the National Association of Black Journalists, where he challenged openly Kamala Harris's race, how she identifies herself, and actually blatantly called the journalists, folks who were out to get him, nasty journalists who were asking him nasty questions, as he puts it. What do you think the impact of that interaction with the National Association of Black Journalists had on the Black community in Georgia and specifically in your district? And if you could just also elaborate on your thoughts about that interaction between Trump and those journalists.
I repeat again something I say often, which is that I'm never surprised when he says things like that. I'm like, yeah, I probably could have seen that coming, but it's still just absolutely shocking to me. Um, oh yeah, that interview was one of the wildest things I've seen in a long time. I can't understand whose idea that was, or the things that he says just in general. So I think just at the front, it was just abhorrent behavior from a presidential candidate and a former president, to just attack people that are trying to ask you legitimate questions. I believe in supporting journalists. I think the work that they do is just fundamental to a functional democracy and to it's something that I think we've seen a lot from Trump, which is that he only really wants to talk to journalists who already agree with him and are really going to be more kind of puff pieces so he can give his talking points. So I was really glad that he got asked these tough questions from Black journalists because they made great points. Why should, Black voters believe that he is going to be the right candidate for them? Because I think it's obvious now, especially from his answers, that he's not out to work for Black Georgians. So this is something again that I've heard come up organically from people that I've talked to because it was just so outrageous. It was, just especially to attack the way that a biracial woman talks about, her experiences. I just can't understand that in this day when we have so many biracial Americans, I have biracial people in my family and they experience the joy of living in both cultures. I heard a line from a movie recently that was, biracial people are both like more of everything, not less of anything. And I think that's, so true of Kamala Harris as well. So to speak about her like that, I think just shows just disdain for the people that he's asking for the votes of. And, that's in a bad way for him, I guess. That's one of those things that has really broken through locally as well.
And despite the train wreck that was that interview with Trump and the National Association of Black Journalists, there are many who are saying that it was an intentional move by Trump to hijack that platform and
Mm.
to get those specific talking points across, because his audience at that moment were not black voters. His audience was the base that he already has. What's your take on the decision by the National Association of Black Journalists to even have Trump on this platform? Um, how can we prevent such figures from hijacking these kinds of platforms meant to uplift marginalized communities?
I think they did a fabulous job. This is a conversation that I have with people a lot about, should we really even be platforming Trump? I think it's a fair conversation to have, but I also think it's the job of journalists to, push back on lies that Trump tells, to push back against those talking points. And I think that's something that the interviewers did beautifully. When he would derail a question, the moderators would say, okay, the question actually was, and I think that interview was just like a really perfect example of what didn't happen at the debate, for example, when Trump just lied, lie after lie after lie after lie, and they would just move on to the next question. So I think when we're thinking about how to talk to candidates in a way that both gives them a platform but doesn't let them derail the conversation to just get their talking points out. I think, those interviewers did a beautiful job.
Another piece of news from the state of Georgia is that 4 days after Georgia Democrats began warning that bad actors could abuse the state's new online platform for canceling voter registrations, the Secretary of State's office, the office of Brad Raffensperger, acknowledged to ProPublica that it identified multiple such attempts, including unsuccessful efforts to cancel the registrations of two prominent Republicans, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And so the confirmation of the attempts to misuse the portal follows separate discoveries by the Associated Press and the Current that the portal suffered at least two security glitches that briefly exposed voters' dates of birth, the last four digits of their social security numbers, and their full driver's license numbers, the exact information needed to cancel others' voter registrations. In light of this information, how do you reassure voters in your district that their votes are not going to be targeted, that when they vote, it's actually going to mean something? And that there's going to be no effort to overturn the election either through complicated means by like this, reaching a data platform, or by outright brutish tactics like we saw in 2020 when Trump pressured the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to give him 11,000 plus votes.
That number is burned into our brains down here. So I think it starts with kind of two pieces. The first is acknowledging that there are real attempts at election subversion. Like you said, we saw what happened in 2020. I actually started being a poll worker in 2020. So I picked a real fun year to get into working elections. So, we saw firsthand how that went and how the lies always spread faster than the truth can catch up. So I think, like I said, we have to start by acknowledging that there are real threats to our votes and that we have a responsibility to check our registrations and make sure that our friends and family understand what they're trying to do so that we can combat it in any way we can. And I think the second piece of it is trying to help people understand the nuts and bolts of how elections work. And in Georgia, I always tell everyone that you want to either send an absentee ballot in, because that's really the only way that you as an individual can verify that your vote was how you wanted it to be, because there's like, that physical absentee ballot record that can be audited. And if you're going to go vote in person, which is how I typically vote, you want to make sure after you get your little ballot printed that you verify on your paper ballot that your vote is accurate as you want it to be, because casting your ballot is when you place it in the scanner. And once you place it in the scanner, it's locked in a ballot box. Those votes can be audited. I've also worked an audit where we go back and literally hand count paper ballots, and it can be viewed by the public. And everything that happens on election day can be viewed by the public. So, you can go watch the setup of precincts. You can watch the breakdown of precincts. You can go to the county elections office afterwards and make sure that everything is going as it should behind the scenes. So the good news is there's a lot of oversight of the actual election process. So we need to make sure that before we get to that point, that we are verifying our registration and that we know how to vote in a way that ensures that, our ballot will have integrity. So I think it's kind of a two-piece thing where we can't deny that there are risks, and that, those risks are very real. And we do have agency as well in ensuring that our individual votes are protected. And the good news is too, Georgia has a long history of basically like attempted election subversion. So, from the civil rights movement, right? There has been active voter rights organizations in this state for decades. They know what they're doing. They understand the risks. They have the legal knowledge to, advocate for us. So there are a lot of people working really hard to make sure that none of this nonsense can happen, and they're watching closely. And I know some people that do that work, and I mean, we owe them so much. So, you just got to make sure that your vote and your registration are taken care of. And also, tune into those election meetings if you're, someone that wants to get into the weeds with that, because they try to do some tricky stuff at those state election board meetings. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, but like I said, I'll repeat it for the millionth time. You got to make sure that your registration is correct and updated and is not it's not deleted, and that you know how to vote on either through absentee or early voting or election day. That's your responsibility.
And your opponent, Representative Mike Collins, as of June 30th of this year, has $551,275 cash on hand. He seems to have so much funds coming into his campaign. He's the incumbent.
Mm-hmm.
How do you plan to mount a solid challenge against the obvious advantage that he has in this campaign?
I always like to remind everybody that money doesn't vote. So he can raise as much money as he wants, but he's got to have the votes of the people that live here, right? So we are, obviously money is a big advantage in an election. So we are trying to raise a lot of money to make sure that we can push back against those ads that I'm sure are coming, and that, we can do direct mail and paid canvassing to make sure that our voice is getting out as much as possible. And we also have a volunteer kind of grassroots plan. So we are phone banking, we are canvassing, we are trying to make sure that we are getting to people where they are. One of the big things that I think people forget, especially with how influential social media has gotten in politics, a lot of people aren't on social media. So they're just busy in their day-to-day lives, trying to get to work, trying to get their kids to school, trying to get everybody fed. They're not as tuned into politics as people like you and I are. It like consumes my thoughts. So we have to make sure that we are really trying to reach those people who aren't as obsessively following the news. And, that's who I'm trying to reach out to, because those are the people that I want to represent. I'm much more interested in talking to people that live and work in this community than, raising $1 million from these kind of outside corporate donors. That's a lot of where Mike Collins's money is coming from. So that money definitely helps. There's a lot that you need money for in an election. I'm sure as well as as anyone. So we're trying to kind of balance those two things. We don't want to be so focused on the money piece that we're forgetting the reason that we're here, which is trying to make life better for the people in our community.
The Biden administration has, some notable wins, especially for young people. When you're talking about student loan forgiveness,
Mhm.
this is the only administration that actually prioritized making this an issue that they're going to tackle, and thousands of people as a result were able to have their student loans forgiven. They've tackled climate change, the biggest investment in climate change
Mhm.
in U.S. history, with the Inflation Reduction Act. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is something that a lot of Republicans who did not vote for that bill are now trying to claim credit
Oh
for.
yeah.
The CHIPS Act places us on a solid ground to compete with Taiwan and China. You look at the PACT Act. It really shows that this particular government is uh, prioritizing veterans. When you go down the list, the Biden administration has so much to be proud of. Yet, for some reason, the message was not resonating with folks because polling constantly showed him within the margin of error or either trailing behind Donald Trump, especially in key battleground states like the state of Georgia. Have you seen a difference since the Democrats have changed who the nominee will be, in how folks are actually responding to these accomplishments? Is the messaging sharper than it was earlier in the summer, in your view?
Absolutely. And I think this kind of goes back to something I said before, that a lot of when it was Biden at the top of the ticket, a lot of those accomplishments just weren't breaking through. Um, and I think there's probably a million different reasons for that. But I know, especially amongst kind of my age group, I'm a millennial. It's hard to look at a man in his 80s and think about your future. And that was tough. That's a hard sell. I think Biden has done, like oh man, the list is long, right? He's done incredible work. I really do believe that he will go down in history as, one of the most successful presidents, surely of my lifetime. Um, but when people don't see those things, and especially again, policy, these things can take years to really get rolled out and for people to feel it in their lives. So there's a disconnect between what people are seeing in their own lives and hearing the words of these policies, which again, that most people don't vote on policy anyway. So it's really, I always say, like, these days it's like the elections are just based on vibes, and the vibes with Biden at the top weren't what we needed to really get young people and those kind of swing voters or people that don't normally turn out engaged enough to turn out. But since Kamala has been the presumptive nominee, I mean, I will say, until I'm blue in the face, I have been just absolutely in awe of how their campaign has come out of the gate swinging. They took advantage of the moment that they had, and they have turned that into real enthusiasm. Um, yeah, that rally in Atlanta Tuesday was just, I mean, magical from my perspective. So I was general admission, so I was kind of like up in the stands, and the people around me. There were young people. There were people. I mean, there was an older couple in front of me that were probably in their 80s. Black, white, brown, and all religions, all ages. So she just has created this absolutely um, just diverse across the board campaign that makes everyone feel like they're a part of it. And that is something that, I mean, you can't talk about money in elections, right? You can't buy that. So I have definitely felt like this campaign has been off to an incredibly strong start. And I'm really, really excited about it because, she also gets to talk about the things that the Biden administration did while, putting her own spin on it and what she'd like to build on. And I think she's done that, very, very well. So I'm really excited to see what they keep rolling out.
And Ms. Daugherty, that Donald Trump and his campaign is attempting to distance himself from the Heritage Foundation's Project
Mm,
2025, which is a blueprint for a second Trump administration that includes highly controversial proposals such as dismantling the Department of Education and obtaining pregnant patients' medical records without their consent. What is your stance on Project 2025, and how do you plan to address these proposals and really educate folks? A lot of being a candidate involves educating people about what the issues are and what's at stake. How do you plan to do that ahead of this November?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, education is so important. I think the idea of Project 2025 has broken through. People bring it up a lot, but if you ask them, what specifically about it concerns them, they kind of don't really know what to say. It just feels like this kind of secret behind the scenes plan. But like you said, there's a lot of stuff in it that's terrifying, and they also, I think, are in the same time that they're trying to distance themselves from the creation of the document, they're trying to distance themselves from a lot of that substantive um, policy proposals in there. But what we can do is tie it to things the Republicans have already been doing. A lot of the stuff in that document is not new. It's just organized now, and 900 pages of it, which is just, oh my gosh, it's ridiculous. But for example, you brought up ending the Department of Education. So there's already been a bill in the House, and my opponent co-sponsored the bill to terminate the Department of Education. So there's a lot of things like this that, we can see aren't just some like elusive boogeyman idea. They have already been trying to do these things. So I think we have to make sure when we're talking about it that we are connecting the dots to what has already been done, what's already been said. And the truth is, a lot of it's not new. They've been talking about defunding the Department of Education. They've been talking about a national abortion ban. They've been talking about all of these things. And, we just have to make sure that we're connecting the dots for people so that they see that this is actually something people are trying to do.
Yeah, and to your point, going back to 1980, the Heritage Foundation was approaching Ronald Reagan and provided the president-elect at the time's transition team with a detailed policy prescription on everything from taxes and regulation to trade and national defense. And the published version of these recommendations was 1,100 pages long, and it was called the Mandate for Leadership, and was described by the United Press International back then as a blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels and shaking out 48 years of liberal policy. Nearly 2/3 of this Mandate for Leadership's proposals, 2,000 recommendations, were adopted by the Reagan administration. And so this is a history repeating itself, like you had mentioned.
Absolutely.
We've seen this before, and I know a lot of folks feel as if this is some kind of conspiracy, like this is something I'm not supposed to know about. But this is very much, the Project 2025 was intended to be very much an integral part of the Trump campaign and its agenda, specifically as it pertains to reproductive rights. Keeping detailed records on abortions without consent is a major part of Project 2025. How would you counteract this invasive policy if elected? And what would you propose to protect reproductive rights in the state of Georgia?
Oh, I mean, that's something that we talk about a lot in my campaign, because Georgia has a 6-week abortion ban. So we are already feeling the effects of Roe being overturned. This is something that is very real to women in my community. I also mentioned to everybody that we haven't expanded Medicaid. So there's a lot of women in this coverage gap where they don't even have the healthcare that they need to ensure a healthy pregnancy. 8 counties in my district don't have an OBGYN. So to me, these things are all tied together, that this is not just about an abortion. This is an attack on women's access to preventative health care. And so I think of this election, my race specifically, as an opportunity to give Kamala Harris the House so that we can actually pass protection for women. And that means we need to pass um, a national protection of abortion rights, kind of codify Roe. Um, and again, like you said, that we need to have a more robust protection for secrecy in healthcare. The government should have no business knowing what's going on with my body and in my healthcare choices. That's something that should just be fundamental. And it was under Roe. So I think we just have to acknowledge again that this is not something that a President Kamala can do by herself. There's a lot that she can do through executive orders, but to actually pass a bill that protects women's rights nationwide, we need to keep the Senate and we need to give her the House. So I try to tie all of these issues back when I'm talking to people in my district that, even though we are a gerrymandered Republican district, the work that we do here, one, affects the outcome of Georgia. So we can help deliver a win for Kamala Harris in Georgia. And if we flip this seat, we can help deliver the House for Kamala to ensure that all of these issues that we're talking about can actually get enacted by the president.
And another major issue is voting rights, like we had talked about earlier. The John Lewis voting rights bill was one of those things that I personally was looking forward to seeing getting enacted in a second Biden term. And I'm hoping that Vice President Harris, if elected, can see that through and see that fulfilled. The Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder severely weakened the Voting Rights Act of 1965, making it easier for states to enact discriminatory voting laws. What specific measures would you advocate for, or would you specifically support the John Lewis voting rights bill? And are there other proposals that you think need to be enacted to combat these efforts and protect the voting rights of marginalized communities in Georgia's 10th district?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is really like a central part of what I would advocate for as a representative. To me, it's just so simple that having your right to vote protected in a democracy is fundamental to a functional democracy, right? The fact that so many of those pre-clearance provisions were struck from the Voting Rights Act, like you said, has just been detrimental to say the least, right? I mean, again, we see in Georgia that the second that happened, we the state legislature were drawing racially segregated districts to weaken the Black vote in Georgia. So, absolutely, we have to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and ensure that, those pre-clearance provisions are strengthened again. I mean, I would even like to see it go farther. I think, especially with technology today, we have the ability to draw nonpartisan districts. There's a lot of states that do it already. I see no reason that we should have partisan drawn districts because this is an issue that happens on both sides. I think it's something we all know as voters that, Democrats are just as guilty of it as Republicans in some places. So for us to have a free and fair election system in this country, there's a lot of reform we need to our voting systems.
One of the things that Mike Collins seems to be proud of is that he voted to, quote unquote, protect truckers from Biden's Environmental Protection Agency and the climate lobby. Climate change is such a big issue, especially among young voters, and it's a big issue around the world. How do you make the case that climate change is something that business-minded Republicans in your district actually should prioritize, and that voting against this is actually against their own interests?
Yeah, absolutely. My education was in geology, and so I actually kind of got my start in organizing in the climate movement. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And, you're absolutely right. It's something that affects all of us. And I think that it might actually be starting to break through that this does affect everyone, that it's not just some distant, boogeyman that, climate is going to collapse or whatever. We're already seeing insurance agencies pulling out of Florida and California. We are seeing the real effects of stronger storms and natural disasters. These are things that are going to affect all of us sooner than a lot of people like to believe. So I think, it's kind of two sides of the same coin that, we have to make sure that business owners and everyone for that matter understands that this will affect their lives. That this is not just some far off in theory issue, that climate change is real right now, and we have really blown past that 350 parts per million that was suggested, I guess 10 or 15 years ago, that was kind of what would keep climate stable. Yeah, we've already got more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than that. So the planet is warming. It's right now it's a conversation about how bad will it be. So we have a lot of work to do to ensure that we are at least coming in at the bottom of that curve, as opposed to just, blowing past it, because there's kind of a scale of how much it will affect us, right? And then the other part is, especially with the bill that Biden passed, there's a lot of investment for small businesses and for renewable energy. So grew up working on farms, so I think of it a lot from that perspective. And agriculture is really big in this district. So there are a lot of investments in conservation that can help farmers or landowners. There's a lot of investments for renewable energy that can help farmers, business owners. So there's a lot of things that will help the climate issue that will also directly help people's bottom lines. And I think that's also a disconnect that people don't realize a lot of the time, that not only will it personally affect you negatively if climate change gets out of control, it can personally affect you positively to be on the fighting side. And so when I talk to people, I try to connect those dots, that this isn't just about, stopping this climate change boogeyman. This is going to benefit you directly in your life to be on the right side of this issue.
And one of the things that the Republicans are struggling to do in the remaining days we have before the election is actually defining and branding Vice President Kamala Harris. There's been talk of her as the quote unquote border czar to diminish her record on immigration in the eyes of voters. Of course, the border is a huge issue. Democrats, I've always said, lost on the issue of the border, because the Republicans managed to convince the majority of the people that this is a serious issue that the Democrats have been weak on, and that they ought to be trusted. But you had a bill crafted by Republican legislator, Senator James Langford of Oklahoma, Republican through and through, who wrote this bill, and Trump deliberately told Republican legislatures in the House and the Senate to vote against this bill so that he could run on this issue against Joe Biden. And that was something that I was hoping that Biden would get across on the debate stage. But Harris seems to be making that one of the key central pieces of her stump speeches, since she has been at the head of the ticket. How serious of an issue is the border in your district, and how do you plan to get across to voters that Republicans actually have owned the chaos at the border by deliberately choosing inaction over a bipartisan solution that could have addressed the issue for political purposes?
I think you really said it there. I think you have to connect the dots for people, that to Republicans, the problem of immigration is more important to them than the solution. And this is something that we have seen over and over and over again. I will use Collins as a perfect example here. So while that bill was being negotiated, he came and did an interview in Athens on immigration and did not mention that bill being negotiated. So, I mean, it's just so clear that they have no interest in actually being honest about this problem and actually attacking the problem and finding solutions. So Yeah, I'm exactly with you. So whenever I talk to people, I I think we have to be honest about the problem. Like there is an issue at the border. They do not have the funding to secure the border. They don't have the funding to process all of the cases of people that want asylum, that want visas. Um, we haven't had a comprehensive immigration reform bill like in decades. So it's no surprise to me, and it should be no surprise to anyone else that things have changed a lot since then. So I think we need to be honest about the fact that this is an issue that we have a responsibility to solve. And I also try to remind everybody that points at Biden and says it's Biden's fault for not closing the border, that when Trump was in office, 14 times he had executive orders overturned by the courts because it is not the president's job to secure the border. And, you know, I, again, I go back to Collins. He put forward this Lake and Riley Act to basically force shoplifters to be picked up by ICE. And that is too little too late. And so we need to be proactive about actually solving the problem, which includes, more security for the border, but it also has to include attacking the reasons that we have such high immigration. And it's a lot of um, destabilized countries in South and Central America, and that we've had a big hand in those countries becoming destabilized. So, we have to be honest about what the problems are, how the problems started, how Republicans have no issue in actually solving those problems, and, reminding everyone whose job it actually is to fix the problem, and it's members of Congress. That is whose job it is to pass immigration reform. And, pointing at Biden and pointing at, Democrats for holding things up is nonsense when we had this bipartisan immigration reform bill, like you mentioned, and Trump decided that he wanted his buddies in Congress to kill it so that it would benefit him in this race. I mean, it's just they've laid out the argument for us. We just have to make sure that people actually know what's happening.
And to your point, he also voted in favor of House Resolution 1371, which strongly condemns the Biden administration and its quote unquote border czar, Kamala Harris's quote failure to secure the United States border. So this is something that he has attached his name to. He's attached his name to the criticism of Harris, while he's also attached his name to the inaction of immigration. And how can those two things coexist and equal someone who's actually serious about
And
this issue?
something that I always come back to too is just the nonsense of it is this bill that he is trying to pass that would require ICE to pick up shoplifters. One of the reasons ICE does not pick up shoplifters is because they don't have the beds to pick up every single petty crime. And you know what bill had funding for more ICE beds? The bipartisan immigration reform bill. So it's just dishonest all the way around. And I think it's like I said, it's our job to make sure that that's breaking through, because that the only thing that's they're talking about is Kamala Harris, the borders are. And it's just, again, like I said, just dishonest, just nonsense. And, we got to make sure that we're telling the real story of what's happening.
So before I let you go, Ms. Doherty, this election is going to be interesting because I've always said, from the beginning of, the Kamala Harris campaign, which was July 20th of 2024, that going forward, this has to be a flawless campaign. There can't be any internal squabbles. There cannot be any, distractions or skeletons coming out the closet. This has to be a flawless 2008 Obama-style campaign. And in order to have a fighting chance against the juggernaut that is the MAGA coalition. Now, I understand Trump has lost every consecutive election following 2016 for the Republican Party. He caused the GOP to lose elections in 2017, in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. And yet the Democrats still seem to be afraid of Donald Trump. Despite that, the Harris campaign has to be flawless, I thought, to make sure that it has a fighting chance against the Trump campaign. And in order to have that fighting chance, they have to rebuild the coalition that Obama was able to build, which includes young minority voters, which includes white Rust Belt voters, which includes folks who are typically those who are left in the margins, those who are not involved or seemingly invested in the political outcome of a particular campaign. She has to build that multiracial coalition against the coalition that is the MAGA coalition. And so for the first time, it seems as if we're going to see the Obama coalition and the Trump coalition going at it this November. Do you have any concerns about that, being that your district is predominantly Republican and that you're running an uphill against, you're running against someone who's an established figure in the community, someone who folks know? Do you have any concerns at all about the prospects of your victory with that background?
So I actually think that Kamala at the top of the ticket is going to benefit me in my race. There's like we've talked about, there's a lot of people that were just pretty much tuned out with Biden at the top. A lot of those parts of the coalition that we need to win, especially, like you said, young voters, minority voters, were just did not feel represented by Biden for whatever reason, fair or unfairly. That's how they felt. So on the flip side, again, fairly or unfairly, however you want to look at it, a lot of people do feel welcomed and represented by the Kamala team, and that they feel like they not only can be a part of that coalition, but they're excited to be a part of that coalition. And I think that's something that's absolutely going to benefit me here and, races in Georgia at large. One of the things that I love the most about Georgia is that we are a very diverse state. We have, the leader of the Democratic Party in Georgia is a Black woman. So we have a lot of fabulous representatives that are, white, Black, brown, young, old. We are a state that is representative of the country in a lot of ways that other states are not. We are a working class state. We are an agricultural state, and all of those things are true of my community as well. So I think it's important for the Kamala Harris campaign to make sure, like you said, that she's trying to expand that coalition and talk to different voters. So there's, I try to reach out to those kind of base Democratic voters that we all think about. But we also need to speak to working class white voters, because in the same way that for the past 50 years, poor and people of color have felt the economy getting harder and harder for them to work within. That's also true of working class white voters. And, that's like me and my family and kind of the community that I grew up in. Rural white voters have also felt pressure from corporate consolidation and jobs being shipped overseas. So I think it's our job to make sure that we're reaching out and saying to those struggling white families, just like we are the struggling Black families, that the economic conditions that will help, us will also help you. And we are here. We're not just running for, the base Democratic voters, but these policies will specifically help you and your family too. Free and reduced lunch at schools will directly help your family if you don't have to pay for or pack a lunch every day. The expanded child tax credit, that's money that's directly in your pocket every month, even if you vote Republican. So there's all sorts of issues like this that Democrats, I don't think, have done a good enough job telling the story of how our policies help all working class families. And that's something that I think Biden tried to do. It just didn't quite break through in the way it needed to. I think he definitely got some of that Midwestern coalition when he was elected in 2020. And I think, Kamala really needs to lean into that as well. I think as far as, she's on the right side of the policy. She's on the right side of the issues. And we just need to do the really hard work of making sure that that breaks through.
And lastly, do you have any favorite for potential vice presidential pick for Vice President Harris's campaign?
Ooh, that's so tough. So I hear that he's kind of out of the running, but I'm a huge Pete Buttigieg fan. I think the two of them on a ticket would have I think they just would have crushed. But I do understand that as a gay man, that would have been a tough sell for some people. Maybe this isn't the year to have that fight. I understand. But I am partial to Mark Kelly. So I grew up a big space nerd. So he's been a figure kind of in my life for years. So I think because of that, I'm a little bit partial to the astronaut. But the truth is I love oh my gosh, I'm going to forget his name. The governor of Minnesota. I was literally just listening to
Tim
an interview with him. Well, there we go. I love him too. I think he's fabulous. So Shapiro has done great work in Pennsylvania. My understanding is that those three are kind of at the top. But I think my preference would be Kelly or Waltz.
Ms. Doherty, thank you so much for the time you spent on the Political Mic. I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. We learned so much from you, and I want to leave an open invitation for you to come back anytime that you have that your schedule allows. With that being said, that will conclude this episode of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, Mike.